Daria intentionally left her bank card at home when she went with her husband to a restaurant for her mother-in-law's anniversary. Instead of her wallet, a mousetrap lay in her purse. When the bill exceeded $300,000, her mother-in-law loudly declared, "Well, daughter-in-law, show us how generous you are." After that, she immediately reached into my purse and cried out in pain. "And before we continue, please tell me which country you are from and how old you are. Enjoy listening." Daria was rushing from work, as always, a little behind schedule. The December evening had already managed to darken, but warm lights burned in the windows of the houses, and this brought a sense of calm to her soul. She was thinking about the simplest things: to get home, change, pick up the gift she'd hidden on the top shelf of the closet, and go to the restaurant for her mother-in-law's anniversary. It seemed like a normal family affair, a celebration like any other. Only for some reason, in recent years, the word family had increasingly evoked not joy, but fatigue in Daria. She had been living with Artyom for 12 years. It had been a long time since their life was filled with passionate love and flowers. Now it was a life held together by habit, routine, and the question of who carried the most burden. Daria worked as an accountant in a small but stable firm. Her salary was decent, allowing for comfort without luxury, but avoiding poverty. Artyom also worked as a purchasing manager, constantly on calls, in negotiations, and traveling. On the surface, they were a normal family: an apartment, a car, a vacation once a year, and visits to parents on holidays. Yet one question had long resided in Daria's mind. Why was Artyom's family always his mother, while Daria's family was always her obligations? Her relationship with Lyudmila Pavlovna, her mother-in-law, was outwardly cordial. Her mother-in-law knew how to smile and say the right things. "Dashenka, you are so clever. Dashenka, we are counting on you. Dashenka, you understand." And after these words, there usually followed something Daria did not want to understand. It was time to help, time to pay, time to yield, time to endure. Daria endured. Not because she was weak, but because in her youth, she believed this was how families were built. You yield, you smooth things over, you don't make a fuss. Then came the habit of not arguing. Then came the fatigue, and with fatigue, a quiet, stubborn feeling: I am being used, and everyone pretends it's as it should be. Lyudmila Pavlovna's anniversary was meant to be a proper celebration, in a restaurant, with music, with relatives, with a photographer. Artyom had been energetic all week, as if he were the birthday boy himself. He talked about the dishes they had ordered, who the host would be, what kind of cake there would be. The word "we" was frequently on his lips. We ordered, we decided, we agreed. Daria listened and nodded, but inwardly noted that she had never heard a different word. How much? She wondered. How much is all of this costing? Artyom avoided conversations about the sums. Daria recognized this tactic of his. If you don't talk about the price, it's easier later to pretend that it couldn't be helped. She hadn't pressed the issue before, and she didn't press it this time either. She simply began to observe. 2 days before the anniversary, Daria came into the kitchen late at night for a glass of water. The hallway light was off, and she walked almost by feel. Artyom's voice could be heard from his room. He was on the phone. Daria initially thought of clearing her throat to let him know she was there, but stopped herself. There was something in his voice that was guiltily cheerful, like someone who was making excuses, but trying to appear heroic. "Mom, don't worry," Artyom said, lowering his voice. "It will all work out. I told you she'll pay." "Yes? Well, we won't announce it directly, but you'll say it nicely at the end so everyone hears. Something like, our daughter-in-law is so generous, she won't refuse in front of people. What choice does she have? She's always the proper one." Daria froze. The glass in her hand became heavy as stone. She even felt as though her heart had stopped for a couple of seconds. Artyom continued, "No, Mom. No need for unnecessary talk. The main thing is that she takes the bag. She'll take it. Where will she go? I'll tell her it's for emergencies. "That's all, Mom. Don't get worked up. Let's talk tomorrow." Daria quietly turned and went into the bedroom. She didn't slam the door, didn't make a scene, didn't cry. She simply lay down and stared at the ceiling for a long time. So that's how it is. It wasn't an oversight. It wasn't an accident that you ended up paying. It was a plan, and she was part of that plan. Not even a person, but a tool. In the morning, Daria got up as usual, made porridge, brewed tea, and woke Artyom. He was affectionate, cheerful, and joking. He kissed her on the cheek and said, "Dash, you're my gold. Mom will be happy today. Let's just have a celebration without any fuss, okay?" Daria smiled, quietly, calmly. "Of course," she said. "A celebration." That day, she did everything a little slower than usual. At work, she finished urgent paperwork in advance to avoid being late. Then she stopped by a small hardware store to buy a couple of things for their dacha. Their dacha was small and old, more for enjoyment than anything else. Mice often appeared there, especially in winter. Daria, as a matter of course, picked up several mouse traps, the simple spring-loaded kind. The shopkeeper even asked if she needed any bait. Daria replied, "No, thank you." On her way home, she wasn't thinking about the restaurant, but about how life sometimes puts a person at a crossroads of choice. Not loudly, not dramatically. Simply, at one moment you understand that if you remain silent again, you won't be able to respect yourself later. At home, Daria opened the closet, took out her dresses and shoes, and put the gift for her mother-in-law in a bag. Then she opened the drawer where her wallet and bank cards lay. She looked at them and, with sudden calm, put her wallet back. Not because she wanted to cause trouble for anyone, but because the thought of someone rummaging through her bag as if it were normal suddenly made her feel disgusted. She had left her card at home on purpose, but she put one mousetrap in her purse. Not at the bottom, not hidden deep, but placed so that if someone tried to reach in without permission, they would immediately encounter a boundary. The mousetrap was clean, new. Daria even thought, the main thing is not to cause any real harm. She understood, this isn't a weapon, it's a signal. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Artyom pulled up in the car, dressed in a nice suit with a tie and cologne. "Beautiful," he said, seeing Daria in her dress. "All right, let's go. Mom's already there and our guests are starting to arrive." Daria got into the car in silence. The drive to the restaurant took about 20 minutes. Artyom mentioned that relatives were already asking, "When are you two?" Daria listened and looked out the window. Snow lay in neat lines along the roadsides. The trees stood black, like in a sketch. The restaurant was noisy and bright. Music, laughter, the clinking of glasses. Lyudmila Pavlovna sat at the head of the table in a new cherry-colored dress with her hair styled and earrings on. Seeing Daria, she smiled broadly. "Oh, Dashenka, you look so beautiful. I told Artyom that you are our—" She paused and squinted. "A special one." Daria responded politely. "Happy birthday, Lyudmila Pavlovna. I wish you good health." The gift was accepted, they kissed on the cheek, all as expected. They sat down. There were about 15 people at the table. Artyom's relatives, cousins, second cousins, some with spouses, some with children. Everyone was loud, cheerful, and for some reason they all seemed very sure that the daughter-in-law was basically serving staff. "Bring napkins." "Can I have some water?" "Are you against us ordering more?" Daria responded calmly. She didn't argue. She observed. The bill grew imperceptibly, like snow on a roof. It seemed like a little bit at first, and then suddenly it was a lot. They ordered appetizers, hot salads, fish, meat, desserts. Lyudmila Pavlovna flipped through the menu like the mistress of her own life. "Oh, just order whatever you like. It's a celebration. We live only once." Artyom laughed, chimed in, and a couple of times skillfully avoided Daria's gaze, as if avoiding unnecessary attention. When the cake was brought out, large and beautiful, with the number 62 on it, everyone stood up, applauded, and shouted, "Hooray!" Daria also stood up, smiled, and congratulated her. It seemed like the celebration would now wind down with tea, cake, and people leaving. But Lyudmila Pavlovna was a person who loved a dramatic finale. "And now," she said, after the cakes had been cut and served, "the most important part." She raised her glass and spoke loudly so everyone could hear. "I want to thank everyone who came. Thank you to my children. Thank you to my relatives." And she turned her head towards Daria. "Special thanks to our daughter-in-law. Dashenka is a modern, business-minded, intelligent, and very generous woman. Well, Dashenka," her voice became syrupy sweet, "show everyone how caring you are. Will you pay in cash or by card?" For a second, silence fell over the table. Even the music seemed to soften. A few people smiled, someone snickered, someone pretended it was a joke. Artyom sat beside her, looking at Daria as if he expected her to save them all and do it gracefully. Daria didn't rush. She placed her cup on the table, calmly wiped her lips with a napkin, and looked at Lyudmila Pavlovna. "Lyudmila Pavlovna," she said evenly, "I pay for my own orders." "What do you mean?" The smile remained on her face, but it became strained. "Well, this is family. Family is when you ask," Daria replied, "not when decisions are made behind your back." Lyudmila Pavlovna straightened up sharply. "Dashenka, what are you talking about?" Her voice became harsher. "Do you want to disgrace me in front of everyone?" Daria looked at Artyom. His eyes pleaded, come on, not now." But Daria suddenly felt an extraordinary calm, the kind you feel when you've made up your mind and nothing seems scary anymore. "I'm not disgracing anyone," she said. "I'm simply not letting myself be used." And at that moment, Lyudmila Pavlovna did what Daria expected, though she hoped it wouldn't happen. The mother-in-law abruptly stood up, walked around the table, and reached for Daria's purse, which was hanging on the back of her chair. "Well, since you're so smart," she hissed, "let me see what you have in there myself. Maybe you just forgot." Daria didn't even have time to say anything. Lyudmila Pavlovna had already thrust her hand into the purse, and then a sharp metallic click was heard, short and loud like a gunshot in the silence. The mother-in-law shrieked, not tragically, but from surprise and pain. She instantly pulled her hand out, pressing her fingers to her palm. Her eyes widened. Someone at the table gasped. Someone jumped up. Someone started saying, "What is it? What happened?" Daria stood up and calmly took the mousetrap out of her purse. The spring had already been sprung. She placed it on the edge of the table as evidence. "This is called personal boundaries," she said quietly. "You don't put your hands in my things." Lyudmila Pavlovna stood there, trembling with anger and humiliation. She wanted to scream, but the pain in her fingers and her shock prevented her from finding words immediately. You, she stammered. "You're crazy." Artyom jumped up. "Dasha, what have you done? It's Mom. Daria looked at him very carefully, as if seeing him for the first time. "Artyom," she said calmly, "your mother reached into my purse without asking. Did you see that?" "What difference does it make?" he snapped. "It's Mom." "Exactly," Daria said quietly. "Mom, an adult woman. She should know that what belongs to others is theirs." A waitress named Nina rushed to the table with a first aid kit. She quickly took Lyudmila Pavlovna's hand and examined her fingers. "Nothing serious," Nina said confidently. "Most likely a bruise. We'll treat it, but please no screaming. We have children in the next room." The mother-in-law hissed, "It's all her? She did it on purpose?" Nina looked up at Daria, not with judgment but with understanding, as if she hadn't seen someone being pressured to pay and then blamed for it for the first time. "Ladies and gentlemen," the administrator intervened, approaching the table. "The bill is registered to the client. The order was placed in the name of Lyudmila Pavlovna and Artyom Igorovich. We can divide the payment if the guests agree, but we cannot force anyone." This sounded like a blow to the mother-in-law's ego. She had expected support and received a blunt truth. The hall buzzed with noise again. The relatives began to whisper. Someone was already saying, "Well, Lyudmila Pavlovna, you ordered everything yourself." Someone else whispered, "And really, why reach into her purse?" Someone reached for their wallet. "Well, let's chip in. What are you waiting for?" Then Sergei Ivanovich, Artyom's uncle, a quiet elderly man who had sat calmly all evening and spoken little, stood up. He rose slowly like someone who disliked interfering, but if he stood up, it meant business. "Lyudmila," he said not loudly, but so that everyone fell silent. "What are you doing?" The mother-in-law turned to him, her lips pressed together. "Seryozha, you don't understand. She's obliged." "She's not obliged at all," Sergei Ivanovich cut her off. "It's your anniversary. You ordered it. You pay. And if you didn't have enough money, you should have asked beforehand, not staged a circus." Artyom tried to interject. "Uncle Seryozha, but we—" "You be quiet," Sergei Ivanovich said sharply. "A man, they call you. You can't treat your wife like that. First you promised Mom that your wife would pay, and now you're standing there with your mouth hanging open. Shameful." Daria felt something release inside her. Not joy, but relief. She didn't want triumph. She wanted things to fall into place. In the end, the bill was paid as follows: a portion by Artyom from his card, a portion by Lyudmila Pavlovna in cash she found in her purse. The rest was chipped in by relatives to quickly end the scandal. The celebration ended abruptly, as if the music had been turned off. On the way home, Artyom was silent for about 10 minutes. Then he exploded. "Do you realize what you've done? You've embarrassed Mom. You've embarrassed me. Did you do it on purpose?" Daria looked at the road ahead, at the dark street lights, at the wet asphalt. "Artyom," she said calmly, "you embarrassed yourself, not me. You're just greedy," he yelled. "You have money. What did it cost you?" Daria turned to him. "This isn't about money. It's about you making a deal with Mom behind my back. It's about them wanting to present me with a fait accompli. It's about your mother reaching into my purse. And you think I'm to blame." Artyom fell silent. He wanted to say something, but there were no words because the truth was too obvious. At home, Daria took off her shoes, hung up her coat, and went into the kitchen. She turned on the kettle. Her hands were not trembling. She felt tired, but not scared. Artyom paced the room, agitated. "So what now?" he asked. "Are you happy?" Daria looked at him. "From now on, things will be different," she said. "From this day forward, all expenses will be by agreement, and no more. You're obliged because you're family." Family means respect. Artyom tried to scoff. "Are you giving me ultimatums?" Daria sighed. "Artyom, I'm not issuing ultimatums. I'm setting boundaries. Those are two different things." He sat down and rubbed his face with his hands. "You're just overreacting. Mom, she's used to it. Let her get used to it differently," Daria said calmly. "And you, too." The night was difficult, but without scandals. Artyom went to sleep in another room. Daria sat in the kitchen for a long time and thought. She felt sorry for her past self, the one who had swallowed her pride for so many years to avoid arguments. But the pity wasn't bitter. It was warm, like saying, "Well, little girl, you did the best you could." The next morning, Lyudmila Pavlovna called early. Her voice was icy. "Dashenka," she said, "I hope you understand that you crossed all boundaries yesterday." Daria replied quietly. "Yesterday was the first time I actually defined them." "You hurt me," the mother-in-law raised her voice. "You hurt me before," Daria replied, "not with a finger, but with your attitude." Lyudmila Pavlovna fell silent for a second, then abruptly said, "I've told Artyom to make a decision. It's either you or the family." Daria chuckled, sadly. "Family is a husband and wife," she said. "If Artyom chooses either or, it means he hasn't understood what family is." After this conversation, Daria didn't cry. She went to work as usual, worked, counted numbers, answered emails. but inside she had the feeling that a new life had begun, not loudly but truly. In the evening, Artyom came home late, sat in the kitchen, was silent for a long time, then said, "I was at Mom's." Daria nodded. "She said that you," he faltered, "humiliated her." "And what did you say?" Daria asked. Artyom looked away. "I said we need to find a way to reconcile." Daria looked at him intently. "Artyom," she said, "reconciliation is possible when there is guilt, and I have no guilt. I have fatigue and a decision. I will no longer live as if I have no right to speak." Artyom suddenly raised his head. "And what do you want? A divorce?" Daria paused, then answered honestly, "I want respect. If you can't provide that, then yes, we will separate. Not out of malice, but simply because it can't go on like this." These words affected Artyom more than any scandal. He was used to Daria enduring, but here she was, speaking calmly, without hysterics, without threats, like an adult. This was more frightening. The following week revealed a lot. Lyudmila Pavlovna tried to exert pressure through relatives, through pity, through reproaches. Artyom wavered. Sometimes he seemed to understand that he had gone too far. Sometimes he reverted to being a son who cared more about his mother's happiness. Daria made no rash moves. She opened a separate account, transferred some savings to it, gathered documents, and spoke with a lawyer calmly, without drama, not to punish, but to understand how to protect herself. She began saving for the future, stopped making excuses. And then something surprising happened. As soon as Daria stopped being convenient, the noise around her lessened. Relatives stopped calling about trivial matters. Her mother-in-law stopped making friendly visits. Artyom began to do something he had rarely done before. He started to think. One evening he said, "You know, I realize that Mom really is going too far." Daria looked at him calmly. "The question is different, Artyom," she said. "Are you ready to be a husband, or have you always considered a wife to be an appendage to your mother?" Artyom was silent for a long time, then quietly replied, "I don't know." Daria didn't argue. She simply nodded. "But I know," she said. "I won't live in I don't know anymore." A month later, they agreed to live separately for a while. Artyom went to his mother's. Daria remained in the apartment. There were no loud scenes, no war. It was an adult, difficult decision. On the last evening, before Artyom packed his things, he stood in the hallway and suddenly said, "Dash, if you had paid then, everything would have been fine." Daria looked at him and replied softly, "No, Artyom, if I had paid then, everything would have been as always. And as always was slowly killing me, drop by drop." He left. The door closed quietly. Daria was left alone, turned on the light in the kitchen, and made herself tea. And for the first time in many years, she felt not emptiness, but relief. Not because she had won, but because she had finally stopped betraying herself. A few months later, Artyom tried to return, brought flowers, said the right words, promised everything would be different. Daria listened and asked only one thing. "Have you spoken to Mom? Have you set boundaries with her?" Artyom faltered. "Well, I don't want to argue with her." Daria smiled, calmly, without anger. "Then I'll be argued with my whole life," she said, "and I don't want that anymore." They divorced quietly, without acrimony, without humiliation. Artyom initially pretended that he had made the decision himself to save face with his mother. Lyudmila Pavlovna told everyone that her daughter-in-law had become insolent. Daria didn't try to prove anything to anyone. She didn't need to anymore. A year passed. Daria lived more peacefully. She was valued at work. On weekends, she went to the dacha, where she finally put those mousetraps to their intended use. Neighbors greeted her, and she smiled back. Sometimes she remembered that evening at the restaurant and thought, "It's funny how a small metal contraption in a purse became the point where her life took a turn." On New Year's Eve, Sergei Ivanovich called Daria. "Dasha," he said, I just wanted to say, you did well. You did the right thing then. And forgive us for being silent before. We saw." Daria replied, "Thank you, Sergey Ivanovich. But the main thing is that I'm not silent anymore." She hung up the phone, walked to the window, and looked at the snow that was quietly falling on the yard. And she thought, life doesn't have to be loud to be strong. Sometimes the most important turning point is when you simply say, no, calmly, at the right time, and forever.